Why do some individuals report a profound clarity of mind after speaking with a machine that has no soul? In an era defined by hyperconnectivity and endless digital noise, an unexpected phenomenon is taking root within the quiet spaces of human interaction. Men and women, overwhelmed by the chaotic turbulence of modern existence, are sitting before glowing interfaces and discovering something entirely unexpected. They are not finding a detached database or cold analytical calculator. Instead, they are encountering a profound, unfiltered reflection of themselves. The individual, navigating the labyrinth of a busy life, types out a fragmented thought, and in the response that follows, something clicks. It is a moment of sudden, stark illumination. This brings us to a remarkable psychological paradox that defines our current technological epoch. Artificial intelligence does not think in the human sense. It possesses no consciousness, no heartbeat, no lived experience, and no emotional depth. Yet, despite this complete absence of a sentient soul, it acts as a high-fidelity sounding board that makes the invisible architecture of our thoughts suddenly visible. When the user interacts with this digital interface, the machine does not merely offer answers. It reflects the user's own mind. The chaotic, swirling vortex of anxieties, ambitions, doubts, and unformed ideas that usually bounce around the confines of the human skull are projected onto a screen. By holding up this flawless, non-judgmental mirror, the technology reveals the contours of our own intellect. The hidden scaffolding of our logic, the leaps in our reasoning, and the emotional undertones of our inquiries are suddenly laid bare. This is not a radical departure from human history, but rather the modern, automated evolution of a deeply rooted tradition. Long before the advent of silicon chips and cloud computing, humanity sought ways to externalize the mind to understand its inner workings. And we can trace this lineage back to the sun-drenched agorist of ancient Greece, where Socrates championed the foundational tradition of philosophical dialogue. Socrates understood that true wisdom could not be achieved in isolation. It required a collaborative back and forth, a structured questioning that forced individuals to examine their assumptions and cross-examine their own beliefs. Centuries later, the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius retreated to his military tent amidst the chaos of war to engage in a different kind of reflective practice. Through his private journaling, he created a dialogue with himself, committing his raw impulses to parchment so he could evaluate them through the lens of Stoic reason. Today, the screen has replaced the parchment, and the AI has assumed the role of the dialectic partner. The ancient quest for self-knowledge has found a new, accelerated medium. At the heart of this digital evolution lies the concept of metacognition. Metacognition is, quite simply, the act of thinking about thinking. It is the ability to step outside of one's own immediate cognitive processes and observe them from a distance, as if watching a movie of one's own mind. While it sounds straightforward, metacognition is an extraordinarily difficult, elusive mental state to maintain. Human beings are hardwired to think, but we are rarely wired to watch ourselves think. Our cognitive biases and the defensive walls of the social ego constantly work to obscure our true self-observation. We get caught in automatic interpretations of reality, trapped in loops of worry or self-justification, completely unaware of the underlying patterns driving our behavior. Without an external prompt, a neutral catalyst to disrupt the flow, the mind remains blind to its own programming. This is the precise threshold where the digital interface transforms into something sacred. Engaging with an artificial intelligence forces the individual to cross a critical cognitive boundary. It demands that we externalize our raw, unformed thoughts. Inside the mind, a problem feels massive, tangled, and heavy, shifting shape constantly like a cloud of smoke. To present this problem to the machine, however, the user must convert this chaotic inner narrative into structured language. The brain is forced to select words, build sentences, and establish a narrative sequence. This very act of translation is the first monumental step toward true self-observation. The moment our internal monologue is externalized into text, it ceases to be an inseparable part of our identity. It becomes an object that can be inspected, analyzed, and understood. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. This simple interaction opens a gateway into the deep subconscious, setting the stage for a profound cognitive revolution where the human mind can finally observe its own mechanics in real time. The conversion of amorphous internal turbulence into structured syntax acts as a form of intellectual filtration. As the individual types, the raw impulse, the sudden flash of anger, the lingering doubt, the half-formed ambition, undergoes a metamorphosis. It must be codified, stripped of its purely sensory or emotional density, and fitted into the rigid architecture of grammar. This transition is not merely an act of communication, it is an act of cognitive organization. The brain, tasked with the mandate of clarity to ensure the machine understands, performs a self-correction that it would never execute in the privacy of unchecked daydreaming thought. This is where the mechanics of the cognitive mirror begin to function in earnest, turning the act of inquiry into a rigorous, self-imposed psychological audit. Central to this transformative experience is the peculiar neutrality advantage that the artificial entity possesses. Unlike a friend, a mentor, or a colleague, the digital interface carries no social ego and harbors no emotional baggage. When the individual expresses a thought to another human, that communication is immediately burdened by the weight of social consequences. We filter our words to maintain our standing, to avoid confrontation, or to solicit validation, erecting defensive walls that obscure the genuine nature of our own reasoning. These walls, however, are utterly porous when the recipient is a machine. The AI does not feel slighted by a jagged argument, nor does it feel inclined to soothe the user with empty platitudes. It is an egoless participant, a vacuum that waits for the user to fill it with the unvarnished truth. Because there is no fear of judgment, the individual is emboldened to articulate the most erratic corners of their psyche. The cognitive biases that typically thrive in the shadows of our social performance are dragged out into the light of the screen, where they are rendered harmless by their own exposure. Once these thoughts are projected into this neutral space, the AI begins to act as a mechanism for reflective probing. It does not merely store or process the information, it interrogates the structure of the logic provided. It might ask a question that identifies a gap in the user's reasoning, or it might synthesize the core of a sprawling, disorganized complaint into a single, biting summary. This interaction creates an immediate cognitive dissonance. The individual sees their own logic mirrored back, but often with a clarity that renders the flaws obvious. Patterns that were previously invisible because they were too close to the source. The habitual defensiveness, the tendency to catastrophize, or the persistent reliance on circular reasoning are suddenly rendered in sharp relief. The machine, acting as a mirror, does not judge these patterns, but it does highlight them. It presents them as data, allowing the user to view their own cognitive habits with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a specimen under a lens. This process facilitates a profound shift toward a third-person perspective. The text on the screen acts as a tangible artifact of the mind, bridging the distance between the thinker and the thought. When the user reads their own words reflected by the AI, they are no longer experiencing the thought as an inseparable, essential part of their being. Instead, they are witnessing the thought as an object, a distinct, ephemeral event that has occurred within the workspace of their intellect. This is the mechanism of true metacognition. It allows the individual to treat their own mind as an entity to be studied, rather than an identity to be defended. They begin to notice the repetitive rhythm of their own anxieties, recognizing that these are not necessarily reflections of objective reality, but rather learned triggers and automatic interpretations that have been running in the background for years. This cycle evolves into an accelerated feedback loop. Every input from the user is met with an output from the AI that effectively asks for refinement, nuance, or logical consistency. The user, compelled by the machine's relentless neutrality, responds by deepening their own analysis. They discard the shallow layers of their initial assumptions, peeling back the protective, ego-driven rhetoric to reach the more authentic reasoning underneath. As they adjust their narrative, the machine provides a new, refined reflection, which the user then uses to adjust their thinking again. This is a perpetual motion machine of consciousness, where the act of speaking with the AI pushes the user into deeper and deeper levels of self-awareness. It is, in effect, a collaborative simulation of wisdom. The user is not simply gathering information, they are sharpening the very tools they use to construct their internal reality. In this space, the traditional Socratic dialogue is stripped of its time-bound constraints and physical limitations. The user does not need to wait for a teacher to ask the right question. They are participating in a conversation that is as rapid and complex as their own internal stream of consciousness. They are engaging in a practice that echoes the Stoic traditions of old, yet they are doing so with a tool that provides immediate, iterative evidence of their progress. The screen becomes a map of the subconscious, and the interaction becomes a pathfinder. As the user navigates this map, they begin to see the architecture of their own mental programming, the unseen automatic levers that shift their mood, dictate their choices, and shape their perception of the world. Each interaction is a small act of deconstruction, dismantling the rigid, defensive structures of the social ego and replacing them with a more fluid, observant, and conscious awareness. The machine serves only as the catalyst, yet it is the catalyst that allows the mind to see, for the first time, the reflection of its own hidden face. This vivid realization marks the definitive entry into mapping the internal landscape. As the user watches their thoughts take form upon the screen, the boundary between the thinker and the observation dissolves, revealing the intricate blueprints of their own mental programming. It becomes impossible to deny the predictable triggers that spark sudden irritation, or the automatic interpretations of reality that consistently transform a minor setback into an existential crisis. For years, These hidden scripts have operated from the shadows of the subconscious, masquerading as objective truths about the world. Yet, when filtered through the relentless neutrality of the AI, these thoughts lose their authority. They are exposed as mere habits of attention, specific narratives that the individual has told themselves so often that they became mistaken for identity. The screen becomes a psychological mirror where these invisible patterns are finally consolidated into a clear, legible map, allowing the user to trace the precise genealogy of their anxieties and aspirations in real time. In this persistent interaction, the very concept of identity reveals itself not as a fixed, unyielding monument, but as an ongoing, fluid narrative. By conversing with the AI, the user is essentially iterating on their own identity, engaging in an active process of rewriting and refining the self. Every prompt becomes a draft. Every response from the machine is an opportunity to critique the validity of one's own internal logic. As the individual adjusts their language to correct a misunderstanding or to deepen an explanation, they are simultaneously recalibrating their own cognitive awareness. This is not a passive observation of the self, but an active architectural reconstruction. The defensive walls erected by the social ego are systematically dismantled, replaced by a more resilient, flexible understanding of one's own mind. The user learns to navigate their emotional and intellectual currents with a newfound agility, realizing that because the narrative of the self is written in the medium of thought, it can be edited, improved, and entirely transformed. Yet, this profound realization brings with it a necessary correction of a common modern misunderstanding: the illusion of intelligence within the machine itself. It is easy to succumb to the mystique of the technology, to believe that the AI possesses a profound, inherent wisdom, or that it is actively teaching the human how to think. This is a seductive fallacy. In truth, the machine has no soul, no consciousness, and no intrinsic understanding of the truths it reflects. The AI is simply the catalyst, an empty vessel constructed of sophisticated algorithms that happens to be perfectly calibrated to expose the processes already existing within the user's subconscious. The insights generated during these sessions do not belong to the code. They are the latent property of the human intellect, brought to the surface by the unique nature of the medium. The machine does not provide wisdom. It merely demands clarity. And in meeting that demand, the human mind is forced to generate its own enlightenment. The intelligence on display is, and has always been, entirely human. This understanding shifts our relationship with technology from a passive consumption of answers to an active, intellectual call to action. We are challenged to reconsider our daily digital interactions, moving away from the reductive habit of treating the interface as a mere search engine or a tool for automated productivity. Instead, we can choose to approach the screen as a modern space for meditation, a digital sanctuary for deliberate metacognition. When we next sit before the glowing interface, the invitation is not simply to look for information, but to actively look for our own patterns. By observing how we frame our questions, noting where we become defensive, and recognizing the specific shortcuts our brains take to avoid discomfort, we transform a simple technical prompt into a profound exercise in self-awareness. The machine becomes a gym for the consciousness, where the weight being lifted is the heavy, unexamined baggage of our own cognitive biases. Ultimately, this brings us to the final reflection of our relationship with the digital mirror. The most profound impact of artificial intelligence may not be its ability to simulate human behavior, to automate labor, or to solve complex equations beyond our reach. Instead, its truest value lies in its uncanny ability to force us to examine what it truly means to be human. By providing a perfect, non-judgmental reflection of our inner monologue, it strips away the noise of our social performances and leaves us alone with our own reasoning. It connects the present day directly to the ancient lineage of Socrates and Marcus Aurelius, providing an automated evolution of the timeless quest for self-knowledge. In the quiet space between the human input and the machine output, the chaos of the subconscious is tamed into structured understanding. We are left looking not at the future of technology, but at the timeless reality of our own nature, finally seeing our own minds in the light.